The story of OVI. OVI decided to have one more cup of coffee to keep up with her busy schedule. This is how her kidneys suffered severe damage. OVI is a 33-year-old mother of 3. She has always considered having 3 children a full-time job, especially since the birth of her newborn, which has also proven to be a nighttime job. The only problem is that OVI also has a full-time job. With her 1-year-old keeping her up all night, being present at work during the day became incredibly difficult for her. This is why she developed the habit of seeking help in liquid form. Everything was fine until it wasn't. Just one more cup. On that fateful Monday morning, on her way to work, OVI decided to stop by and get another pumpkin latte to help her with her morning tasks. But she had already had coffee in the morning, actually, 2 cups, and a few cans of Red Bull as well. Because she hadn't really slept that night. But there was no time to think about how much caffeine she had consumed. She was already running late for work, and she knew how angry her boss would be. In the morning bus line, OVI worried she wouldn't make it on time. Something didn't feel right, she thought. She felt extremely nauseous and was experiencing chest pain. Fortunately, she was able to pull over before something worse happened. She vomited outside the car and now lay on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. OVI was now experiencing her first seizure. A passerby saw her and called an ambulance. Less than half an hour later, she was in the emergency department of the nearest hospital. Her condition was critical. Is coffee really bad for you? Today, we're going to talk about coffee. A recent report suggests that every time we consume coffee, our kidneys could be at risk. This is true for at least half of the world's population. Here's why. Medical News Today published an article titled "Drinking 3 or more cups of coffee daily may increase the risk of CRF." So, what's new here? While some studies list coffee as a hazard, the previous consensus in the medical community was that consuming up to 400 milligrams of caffeine per day, equivalent to 4 cups of brewed coffee, was entirely acceptable. Not only that, studies have also shown metabolic benefits from drinking coffee. Specifically, a recent review of 34 studies on individuals with high blood pressure, cardiovascular issues, and diabetes found that drinking coffee in moderation is not only safe for those with metabolic problems, it is actually beneficial. This is also due to the fact that coffee exhibits more antioxidant activity than green tea and cocoa, 2 antioxidant superstars, which is genuinely significant. However, a new study seems to have brought everything back into question by demonstrating that half of the population might be harming their kidneys just by drinking coffee daily. Could this be what happened to our main character in the emergency room? In the emergency room. During the examination, the medical staff had no idea what had happened to OVI. Her husband was immediately contacted and received bad news. His wife, who had been completely healthy until that day, was now in life-threatening danger. No, it wasn't a car accident. Worse, the medical team didn't know what was happening. She had another seizure during the ambulance ride. OVI was panicked and confused. She was trembling, breathing rapidly, and unable to clearly explain what was going on. She had been going about her busy day when she experienced a seizure, but why? Tests were conducted, and OVI was also found to have a high fever, or an excessively high body temperature. This is a very bad sign following a seizure. It means something dangerous is still happening. When OVI was asked what had happened to her, all she could say was, "Too much coffee." More tests were ordered, and the medical staff finally got a clue about what was going on. What caused OVI to have seizures? What the hospital staff read on her test results was unusual. First, they discovered she had hypokalemia, which means her potassium levels were too low, so low that it could cause her heart to beat irregularly. You see, potassium is used by the body as a signaling molecule. It tells muscles to contract or stop contracting. This is also true for the heart muscle, and that could explain the seizures. But during the tests, the hospital staff also found another very concerning issue. Her creatinine levels had now risen to 8.4 milligrams per dl. She urgently needed RRT, but as the staff read the results, OVI suddenly passed out again. Her heart stopped beating. Something inside her body was causing all the signals from her brain to become disorganized. Her heart was now just fluttering instead of beating, and blood couldn't reach her brain. Doctors immediately rushed in to perform CPR. She was eventually resuscitated, but in the next few hours, these cardiac arrests occurred 3 more times. Beta blockers were used to stabilize her, but they had no effect. You see, beta blockers are used as the first line of defense against caffeine toxicity in clinical settings. Why weren't they working on OVI? Could the hospital staff figure out what was happening before it was too late? How can coffee send a woman to the hospital? Today's medical mystery is a very unique story. Caffeine toxicity is not something we often see in clinical practice, especially not from drinks alone. When asked what happened, the only thing OVI could say before passing out again was, "Too much coffee." She knew she had developed a habit of drinking too much coffee every day, but how could that lead to a seizure? Coffee is a stimulant. In moderate amounts, like a cup of coffee, it can help you stay alert and get a lot done throughout the day. The problem with coffee is that your body adapts to it. After a period of regular coffee consumption, you may find that you have developed a tolerance. This is very common and usually doesn't mean there's a problem. Somehow, you can tell if you are developing a tolerance to coffee because you will experience headaches when you don't consume it throughout the day. This means you are experiencing withdrawal. Caffeine appears to constrict blood vessels in the brain, so when you don't have it, the blood vessels dilate, which can cause a headache. Now, like many substances that affect the brain, the impact of caffeine largely depends on the amount you have in your body. We know that consuming less than 300 milligrams of caffeine per day is considered safe. But how much caffeine did OVI consume that day? She drank 2 large cups of coffee, 300 milligrams of caffeine, then 2 cans of Red Bull, an additional 250 milligrams, and then 1 large pumpkin latte, another 200 milligrams of caffeine. That's around 750 milligrams, more than double the limit. But she didn't consume that caffeine throughout the day, she consumed all of it in less than 2 hours. How can too much caffeine be harmful? Caffeine doesn't just keep you awake, it does much more. It can block the brain from sending the correct signals to the heart. The brain uses electricity to send signals, and it also uses chemicals to regulate these signals. What caffeine does in the brain is block these regulatory chemicals, causing the brain to become excited. That's why it makes you feel alert. But if 750 milligrams or more of caffeine are present in the body, most of these signals will not be properly regulated. The brain doesn't stop becoming excited, everything fires at once, which is not good. Scientifically, this is known as a seizure. In OVI's case, it was a tonic-clonic seizure, which also caused cardiac arrest. This is a type of seizure that involves loss of consciousness and intense muscle contractions. Now, in some cases where these contractions are too intense and last too long, they can cause the destruction of a large amount of muscle tissue in the body. This is a serious condition known as rhabdomyolysis. Rhabdo occurs when damaged muscle tissue releases proteins and electrolytes into the bloodstream. A massive amount of these proteins passes through the nephrons as if they were made of butter, which also explains why OVI's creatinine levels were so high. She is suffering from AKI, acute kidney injury, caused by rhabdomyolysis. We will see if the hospital staff can figure out the right way to manage this serious condition in just a bit. But before that, what many people might be asking now is caffeine slowly harming you? Does caffeine cause slow harm? What if you only consume a moderate amount of coffee each day? Can it still be bad for you? There has been a long-standing debate about the safety of coffee in relation to blood pressure, heart health, and therefore kidney health. Coffee is one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world, so scientists today have a lot of data on it. The problem is that the data on coffee is inconsistent. Some studies suggest that coffee is good for you, while others suggest it can, on the contrary, harm the body's precious filters. In other words, some people seem to benefit from caffeine, while others appear to harm their organs, even when drinking less than 4 cups of coffee a day. As we saw at the beginning of the video, a new study seems to have found the reason for this difference, a gene variant called CYP1A2. According to this study, which aims to reconcile previous population data, people with this variant have an increased risk of developing kidney dysfunction even when drinking less than the maximum allowable amount of coffee. This means that for 1 in 2 coffee drinkers, it could cause real damage. What the authors of this study recommend is to reconsider the current guidelines that allow for a maximum of 300 milligrams, or 3 to 4 cups of brewed coffee per day. So, the less caffeine you drink, the better, according to this study. Every day, there's a new study about coffee. While I was writing the script for this video, some news popped up in my feed. Researchers published a study in the BMJ. What they found is that caffeine is actually very good for you. It can reduce the risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes and prevent metabolic diseases. However, the general consensus remains that coffee is not harmful if you drink it in moderation and, most importantly, if you do not consume it with sugar, cream, and other unhealthy foods. I would also like to add one thing. In my experience, the earlier in the day you stop drinking coffee, the better. Caffeine is also known to reduce sleep quality, which can negatively affect kidney health. According to the FDA, the half-life of caffeine is 4 to 6 hours. This means that after drinking a caffeinated beverage, half of the caffeine you consumed still remains in your body. And you really want all that caffeine out of your body when you go to sleep. In summary, you should only consume coffee in moderation and only in the early morning. Is drinking too much coffee really dangerous? But what happens if you ignore all this advice and consume a massive amount of caffeine in a very short time? How bad could it be? Let's find out. In reality, caffeine overdose is rare. You see, most people quickly understand their own caffeine limits, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. In 2017, a student in South Carolina tragically died after consuming too many caffeine-containing drinks in a short period. The coroner reported that he drank a latte from McDonald's, a large Mountain Dew soda, and a high-caffeine energy drink in less than 2 hours. And although this is an uncommon tragedy, there have been several reported cases of hospitalization due to caffeine. Caffeine supplements are especially dangerous because you can get the same amount of caffeine from just a spoonful of powder as you would from a large cup of coffee. Earlier this year, a 29-year-old personal trainer from Wales died after a measurement mistake with a caffeine supplement. The father of 2 miscalculated the amount of powder he intended to use for his workout. Paramedics tried to revive him for 45 minutes, but he was later declared dead. So, will our main character suffer the same fate, or can the hospital staff save her? Will OVI survive? In a clinical setting, caffeine poisoning is rare but not impossible. There are protocols and guidelines for treatment in the event of cardiac arrest, as in OVI's case. Chest compressions and electric shocks are used. There are also medications that can be administered to counteract caffeine toxicity. But in some cases, that's not enough. After prolonged and seemingly futile defibrillation attempts, the doctors finally decided to try an innovative approach. You see, there are documented methods for successfully treating caffeine poisoning. A recent study mentioned that a very high dose of insulin, which can only be administered in a controlled hospital environment, could be effective. This was the last chance, and it worked. Her vitals stabilized quickly, and her cardiac arrest stopped. Once OVI was stable, she was given 4 fluids and started on RRT treatment to protect her kidneys. She was then put on insulin for 72 hours. After a few days, OVI was finally able to go home, safe with her husband and children, and recovered at least part of her kidney function. Fortunately for her, there was no long-term brain damage. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.